Linda stood in the center of her kitchen, the silence of the house shattered by the rhythmic, heavy thud of a man's boots on the front porch. In her trembling hand, she clutched a single piece of paper. A foreclosure notice stamped in a red so bright it looked like a fresh wound. Behind her, the heavy oak desk drawer stood agape, exposing a mountain of secret bank statements and a velvet jewelry box containing diamonds she had never worn. The key she'd found in her husband's coat pocket felt like an ice cube melting against her palm, slick and unforgiving. The front door creaked open, and Mark's cheerful whistle echoed through the hallway, the sound of a man who had no idea his wife was standing amidst the wreckage of a 30-year lie. As his shadow lengthened across the floor, Linda realized the man hanging his coat in the hall wasn't the provider she loved, but a stranger who had already sold the roof over her head. She didn't move, didn't breathe. She only watched the shadow grow, knowing that once she spoke, the life she knew would vanish forever. Linda Holloway moved the rag in slow, hypnotic circles across the formica, her movements dictated by a muscle memory so deep it felt etched into her bones. The surface of the bar was a map of her life. Nicks from dropped forks, rings from coffee mugs that had sat too long, and that one deep gouge where a disgruntled trucker had hammered his fist 3 winters ago. Above her, the air was a thick, stagnant soup of overcooked bacon grease and the acidic tang of the cheapest ground coffee money could buy. It was a scent that clung to her skin, burrowed into the fibers of her clothes, and followed her home like a persistent ghost. Outside the fog-streaked windows, Erie, Ohio, was waking up in its usual state of exhaustion. The city didn't so much rise as it did emerge from a gray shroud of coal dust and lake mist. The skeletons of the old assembly plants, rusted and hollowed out like the rib cages of great fallen beasts, punctured the low-hanging sky. A few headlights cut through the gloom, illuminating the flakes of soot that drifted down like black snow. Linda adjusted her apron, the fabric thin and faded from 1,000 washings, and forced a thin smile for the man sitting at the end of the counter. His fingers, gnarled and stained with the permanent grease of the shipyard, trembled slightly as they hovered over his ceramic mug. "Another one, Artie?" she asked, her voice raspy from the morning damp. The old man nodded without looking up. "Keep it coming, Linda. Only thing keeping the blood moving." She poured, the dark liquid steaming in the chilly air. The diner was drafty. She could feel the wind whistling through the cracks in the window frames, a reminder that the building was aging just as fast as the people inside it. She looked up at the ceiling, where a hairline fracture in the plaster had begun to spiderweb toward the light fixture. It was a job for next month, or the month after, provided the weekend rush brought in enough to cover more than just the heating bill. The bell above the door gave a sharp, cheerful jingle that felt entirely out of place in the morning silence, and the heavy thud of the old refrigerator provided a low-frequency hum that vibrated through the floorboards. The atmosphere shifted the moment Mark stepped inside. He didn't just enter a room. He reclaimed it. He brought with him the sharp, clinical scent of expensive sandalwood cologne and the crisp energy of the outdoors. In his tailored wool coat and perfectly knotted silk tie, he looked like a visitor from a different century, or at least a different zip code. He leaned over the counter, his face glowing with a vitality that made Linda feel suddenly, acutely aware of the gray in her hair and the ache in her lower back. "Morning, beautiful," he said, his voice a smooth baritone that used to make her heart skip. Now, it just felt loud. He planted a kiss on her cheek, quick, practiced, the kind of affection one might give a favorite aunt. "You're out early," Linda said, wiping a stray drop of coffee from the counter. "Budget meetings. The mayor's on a warpath about the new waterfront initiative." Mark checked his Rolex with a flick of his wrist. It was a beautiful piece, gold and heavy, a gift she'd insisted on for their 20th anniversary back when the diner's books were still in the black. "I won't be home until late. Why don't you close up early tonight? We'll go to that Italian place in the city." "My treat." He reached out, squeezing her hand for a fleeting second. His palm was soft, his nails manicured. The hands of a man who moved paper, not mountains. Linda looked into his blue eyes, searching for the boy she'd married 30 years ago. But all she saw was the polished facade of a city official. He laughed at something she hadn't said, a bright, confident sound that masked the hiss of the espresso machine. And then he was gone, leaving behind a lingering trail of confidence that felt as artificial as the sweetener in the yellow packets. The diner felt smaller after he left, quieter. Linda spent the rest of the morning in a daze of routine, but a seed of restlessness had been planted. It was the coat. Mark had left his heavy charcoal overcoat hanging in the back office since Thursday, claiming he'd forgotten it in the rush of a late-night session. She decided to take it home. As she lifted it from the peg, the weight of the garment felt substantial, the fabric high quality and cold to the touch. She was folding it over her arm when her hand brushed against something hard in the inner breast pocket. She reached in, expecting a forgotten receipt or perhaps a stray pen. Instead, her fingers closed around a small, jagged piece of metal. She pulled it out. It was a nickel-plated key, the head intricately engraved with a pattern she didn't recognize. It was beautiful and cold, catching the weak light of the office bulb. Linda stared at it. She knew this key, or rather, she knew what it belonged to. In the corner of Mark's home office sat a massive oak desk, a heavy, Victorian beast of a thing that had belonged to his father. The bottom right drawer was always locked. Mark had told her years ago that it held the deeds to his family's old properties and some sensitive city documents he wasn't supposed to have at home. She'd never questioned him. Why would she? Trust was the foundation of their life. Or so she'd told herself every time she bit her nails down to the quick during the lean months. The drive home was a blur of gray pavement and skeletal trees. The house, a 2-story brick structure that had once been the pride of the neighborhood, looked tired in the afternoon light. The paint on the porch was peeling in long, curled strips like dead skin. Inside, the silence was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. She didn't take off her coat. She went straight to the office. The air in the room was stale, smelling of old paper and the faint metallic scent of the radiator. The oak desk loomed in the corner. Linda sat in Mark's leather chair, the seat still holding the faint indentation of his frame. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. She told herself to stop. She told herself she was being paranoid. But the key felt like it was burning a hole in her palm. She slid the key into the lock. It turned with a dry, mechanical click that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet house. The drawer was heavy, resisting at first, then sliding forward to reveal a treasure trove of secrets. There were no deeds here, no city documents. Instead, there were stacks of thick, cream-colored folders embossed with the gold seals of banks she didn't recognize. Linda pulled out the top folder. The paper was heavy and expensive. She opened it, her eyes scanning the rows of figures. These were their savings accounts, the ones they'd started when they were 25, the someday fund for the diner's renovation and their eventual retirement. She remembered the pride they'd felt when they hit the $50,000 mark. Her finger traced the column of numbers. The balance didn't make sense. She saw a series of massive withdrawals, 10,000, 15,000, 5,000, stretching back over the last 3 years. The final entry was a single, devastating line. A balance of 0, followed by a red-inked overdraft fee. A cold sweat broke out on her forehead. She felt the room tilt. She grabbed the next folder, her breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. It was the mortgage statement for the house. They had paid the house off 5 years ago. She remembered the small bonfire they'd had in the backyard to burn the papers. But here, in black and white, was a new loan. A massive, predatory second mortgage taken out 18 months prior. The payments hadn't been made in 90 days. At the bottom of the pile, she found a document with a bright red stamp that seemed to scream at her. Notice of foreclosure. The date on the header was from a week ago. The final grace period had expired. The walls of the room, the house she had scrubbed and decorated and called a sanctuary, suddenly felt like cardboard. She reached out and touched the floral wallpaper, expecting it to crumble under her fingertips. Mark's signature was everywhere. On every withdrawal slip, every loan application, every deceptive piece of correspondence. He had signed their lives away while she was making pancakes and worrying about the price of eggs. Then she found the small, velvet-lined box at the very back of the drawer. Inside were receipts, not for bills or business expenses, but for things she had never seen. A pair of diamond earrings from a boutique in Cleveland, $8,000. A receipt for a 6-month lease on a luxury apartment in the city center. The name on the lease wasn't hers. It was a woman named Elena. Linda sat on the floor, the documents scattered around her like fallen leaves. The nausea came in waves now, a bitter, acidic heat that rose in her throat. She looked at a receipt for a dinner at a 5-star restaurant. The wine alone had cost more than she made in a week at the diner. She thought of the way she'd been reusing coffee filters to save a few cents, the way she'd patched her own shoes rather than buying new ones. The anger didn't come all at once. It started as a low humming vibration in her chest, a slow building heat that pushed back the cold paralysis. Mark hadn't just made a mistake. He hadn't just fallen into a hole. He had systematically, meticulously dismantled their life to build another one in the shadows. He had used her father's legacy, the diner that was her only link to her past, as collateral for his own vanity. The sound of gravel crunching in the driveway snapped her back to the present. The heavy thud of a car door. Mark was home. Linda's hands moved with a frantic, desperate energy. She shoved the folders back into the drawer, her fingers trembling so much she nearly dropped the key. She slammed the drawer shut just as the front door creaked open. The nickel-plated key disappeared into the pocket of her skirt, the cold metal biting into her thigh. "Linda, you home?" Mark's voice drifted up the stairs, as cheerful and hollow as a bell. She stood in the center of the office, her heart a frantic drumbeat. She smoothed her hair, wiped her face with the back of her hand, and forced her breathing to slow. When she walked out onto the landing, she was the same Linda he had left that morning, a little tired, a little worn, but fundamentally unchanged. Or so he thought. "In here," she called out, her voice sounding thin and brittle to her own ears. Mark appeared at the bottom of the stairs, shedding his coat with a sigh of relief. "Lord, it's freezing out there. What's for dinner? I'm starving." "I'm making the beef stew," she said, her voice steadier now. "The way you like it." Dinner was a performance. Linda moved between the stove and the table like an actor on a stage, her movements precise and detached. She watched him eat. She watched the way he tore into the bread, the way he wiped a smudge of gravy from his lip with a linen napkin. He talked about the city council, about the stress of his job, about how he was doing it all for them. Every time his fork scraped against the porcelain, the sound grated on her nerves like a serrated blade. She felt a primal urge to scream, to reach across the table and rake her nails across that smooth, lying face. But she stayed still. She stayed quiet. She was a woman who had learned early that if you control the surface, people don't look at the depths. That night, the darkness of the bedroom felt like a living thing, heavy and suffocating. Linda lay on the very edge of the mattress, her body stiff. Mark was fast asleep beside her, his breathing deep and rhythmic. He slept with the peace of a man who had no conscience. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, and it made her skin crawl. She stared at the shadows on the ceiling, the branches of the oak tree outside, casting skeletal fingers across the plaster. She realized then that she didn't know the man sleeping 3 feet away. He was a stranger who had been wearing her husband's skin. Morning brought no relief, only a new kind of wreckage. When she arrived at the diner, the smell of damp earth and rot hit her the moment she opened the door. In the center of the floor, a dark, shimmering pool had formed on the black and white linoleum. She looked up. The ceiling was sagging, a large gray blister of plaster hanging precariously over the main counter. Drip, drip, drip. The sound was rhythmic, relentless. The roof had finally given up. Linda stood in the middle of the room, watching the dirty water splash into the puddle, carrying with it bits of insulation and grit. It felt like a physical manifestation of her life. Everything she had tried to keep dry and safe was now being soaked in filth. She went to the phone and called the local contractor, a man named Miller, who had been doing repairs for her father since the 70s. "Linda, I'll be honest with you," Miller said, his voice crackling over the line. "That roof is shot. I can patch it, but you're looking at 10, maybe 12,000 for a full replacement. And with the winter coming..." Linda looked at the cash register. She knew exactly what was in there. $300 in small bills and a handful of change. "I'll call you back, Miller." She hung up and leaned her forehead against the cool plastic of the phone. The drip continued, a mocking metronome. The bell above the door jingled. She straightened up, expecting a regular, but instead, 2 men walked in. They weren't from around here. They wore leather jackets that looked too new, and they moved with a heavy, deliberate confidence that set off every alarm in Linda's head. They didn't look at the menu. They didn't sit down. "We're looking for Mark Holloway," the taller one said. He had a scar that ran through his left eyebrow and eyes as flat as a shark's. "He's at the city building," Linda said, her voice tight. "This is a place of business. If you want coffee, sit down. If not, the door's behind you." The man smiled, but his eyes didn't change. He stepped closer, bringing with him the smell of stale tobacco and something metallic. "Tell your husband that the interest on his debt doesn't stop just because he's hiding behind a desk. Tell him we're tired of the excuses." He reached out and grabbed Linda's wrist. His grip was like a vice, his fingers digging into the soft skin. Linda gasped, trying to pull away, but he held her firm. "Tomorrow," he whispered. "We come back tomorrow. If he doesn't have the first installment, we start taking it out of the furniture. Or maybe we start with you." He let go, leaving a red, angry mark on her arm. The 2 men turned and walked out, the bell jingling with a final, mocking tinkle. Linda sank onto a stool, her heart racing so fast she felt dizzy. Debt. Not just the bank, not just the mortgage. Mark had gone to the sharks. He had brought the violence of the world to her doorstep. She needed to know how deep the hole went. She left the diner, the closed sign swinging erratically in the wind, and drove to the bank. She spent 3 hours in a cramped office with a loan officer who looked at her with a mixture of pity and professional detachment. "Mrs. Holloway, I don't know how else to say this," the officer said. sliding a stack of documents across the desk. These loans were all approved. Your signature is on every single one of them. Linda looked at the papers. There it was. Linda Holloway. The L was slightly too slanted. The Y had a tail that was a fraction too long. It was her name, but it wasn't her hand. She realized with a jolt of pure, icy horror that Mark had spent hours practicing this. He had sat in their home, perhaps while she was sleeping or watching television, and meticulously learned how to forge her identity. He hadn't just stolen her money. He had stolen her will. She drove back to the diner in a trance. The rain was coming down harder now, a cold, gray deluge that turned the city into a watercolor painting of misery. As she pulled into the lot, she saw it. Across the front window, someone had sprayed a jagged fluorescent orange mark. It was a symbol used by the local crews to mark a property for collection. It looked like a wound, bright and ugly against the gray glass. People were stopping to look, their faces blurred by the rain, their whispers almost audible through the car windows. The Holloway name, which had stood for 3 generations of hard work, was now a joke, a warning. Linda didn't go inside. She sat in the car and watched the rain wash the orange paint down the glass in long, bloody streaks. She felt something within her shift, a final, tectonic alignment. The woman who had spent her life trying to keep the peace, trying to hold the walls up, was gone. In her place was someone else, someone colder, someone who knew that when a building is beyond repair, the only thing left to do is let it burn. The confrontation happened that night, in the belly of the diner. She had called Mark and told him to meet her there after the city council meeting. She told him there was an emergency with the roof. When he walked in, the diner was dark, lit only by the flickering street lamp outside and a single desk lamp she'd set on the center table. Mark looked around, his brow furrowed. "Linda, what's going on? It's pitch black in here." "Sit down, Mark." Her voice was different. It lacked the soft edges of the wife he knew. He hesitated, then sat, the vinyl of the booth squeaking under his weight. Linda reached into her bag and began to lay the documents out on the table, one by one. The bank statements, the foreclosure notice, the receipts for the earrings, the lease for the apartment, and finally, the forged loan applications. Mark's face went through a rapid series of transformations. Confusion, then a flicker of recognition, and finally, a cold, hard mask of defiance. He didn't apologize. He didn't beg. He leaned back and let out a short, sharp laugh. "So you found the drawer," he said, his voice devoid of its usual warmth. "I figured you'd be too busy worrying about the price of bacon to notice. You forged my name, Mark. You took out loans on my father's business. You gave our life to a woman who probably doesn't even know your middle name." "Our life?" Mark snapped, leaning forward into the circle of light. "This isn't a life, Linda. This is a slow death. This city is a tomb, and this diner is the coffin. I wanted something more. I deserved something more." "And the gambling? The men who came here today and threatened me? Do you deserve that too?" Mark flinched at the mention of the men, but he recovered quickly. "I had a system. I just needed a little more time. If you hadn't gone poking around..." "The time is up, Mark. The bank is taking the house. They're taking this place. We have nothing." "We?" Mark sneered. "No, you have nothing. I have connections. I have friends in the city. I'll land on my feet. You're the one who's going to be left in the rain." He stood up, his hand reaching out to sweep the papers off the table. He looked old in the harsh light of the lamp. the polished facade finally cracking to reveal the hollow, desperate man underneath. "I'm leaving, Linda. I'm going to Elena's. Don't bother calling." "You aren't going anywhere," Linda said quietly. At that moment, the front door of the diner rattled. Not a knock, but a heavy, rhythmic pounding that made the glass shiver in its frame. Outside, the headlights of a black SUV cut through the rain, illuminating the two men from the day before. Mark's face went ashen. He looked at the door, then at Linda, his eyes wide with a primal, animal terror. "Did you call them?" "I didn't have to," Linda said, her voice like ice. "They said they'd be back. I just made sure I was here to open the door." Mark scrambled backward, his expensive shoes slipping on the wet floor. He tried to hide behind the counter, crouching down among the bags of flour and the stacks of napkins. He looked pathetic, a small, broken man trying to disappear into the shadows of the world he destroyed. Linda walked to the door. She felt a strange, detached calm. She looked at Mark one last time. He was weeping now, a soft, pathetic sound that reminded her of a wounded dog. "Please, Linda," he hissed. "Don't let them in. They'll kill me." "You already killed us, Mark," she said. She turned the lock. The door swung open, and the two men stepped in, the rain dripping from their coats onto her clean floor. They didn't even look at her. They walked straight for the counter. Linda walked out. She didn't look back when she heard the first scream or the sound of the glass breaking. She walked to her car, the rain soaking through her thin coat, and drove away. The next 6 months were a masterclass in survival. To avoid jail time for the financial crimes Mark had committed in her name, Linda had to sign everything over. The house, the diner, the few remaining assets. It all went to the creditors and the banks. She moved into a tiny, one-room apartment on the edge of town, a place that smelled of old cigarettes and lemon bleach. She took a job at a massive, corporate-owned cafeteria in the city's industrial park. It was hard, anonymous work. She spent 8 hours a day on her feet, chopping vegetables and scrubbing industrial-sized vats, her identity reduced to a name tag and a clock-in number. But for the first time in 30 years, she was free. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday. She took the papers to the lakefront, the same place she used to go as a girl when the world felt too small. The shore of Lake Erie was a desolate place in the late autumn. The gray pebbles crunched under her boots, and the wind whipped her hair into a tangled mess. The water was the color of lead, vast and indifferent, the waves rolling in with a heavy, rhythmic thud. Linda stood at the water's edge. She took the final decree out of her pocket. She looked at the name Mark Holloway one last time. She felt nothing. No anger, no regret, no love. Just a profound, hollowed-out peace. She struck a match, shielding the flame from the wind with her palm. The paper caught quickly, the edges curling into black ash. She held it until the heat stung her fingers, then let the wind take the remains. The ash danced for a moment in the air before vanishing into the gray expanse of the lake. She took a deep breath, the cold, salt-tinged air filling her lungs. She looked back at the city. Erie was still there, a silhouette of rust and ambition. But it no longer held her. She was 52 years old. She had no money. And she was starting over in a world that didn't care about her name. She turned and began to walk back toward her car. Her gait was different now. The slouch was gone. She walked with the steady, measured pace of a woman who had seen the bottom of the lake and decided she wasn't ready to stay there. The sun began to break through the clouds, a pale, watery light that turned the surface of the water into a sheet of hammered silver. Linda didn't look back. She had a shift starting in an hour, and for the first time in her life, she knew exactly where she was going.